Hello and welcome to the Knights of Glen. This is going to be a very different video. This is going to just be me going over some of my favourite academic books for my personal studying of comics, both in undergrad and in my current postgrad research. And these books that I would recommend to those who are just interested in the background of comics, academia around comics, or like myself, feel called to researching comics. The first is this book, which is The Rough Guide to Graphic Novels. I wouldn't recommend this to someone trying to get into graphic novels, but if you've been reading graphic novels for a while or just want to learn more after reading graphic novels, this just breaks them down, must-reads, the history of them, what they are, and it's just a good foundation for study and definitions or trying to find out new reads, really, that have some academic prowess to them. Probably the most important to my current research is this hefty book, which is Pulp Empire, The Secret History of Comic Book Imperialism. And it's about, in both British and American comics, how our enemies or people were colonized or just abused in an imperial context have been represented in comics. If you haven't heard of the Yellow Peril in comics, I'd definitely go and recommend reading into it, because it's quite horrific seeing what mainstream comics have contributed to Asian hate in the media, even to now, through stereotypes that were perpetrated in comics. Going on from that is, if you're interested in war comics, but this is When Comics Went to War, which focuses on British comics during the Second World War and their role in the fight against the Nazis, because you hear about Superman, Captain America, that in American context, but if you're interested in a wider context of it, I'd highly recommend this book, which is, as I said, about British comics and the role they played in propaganda in the Second World War. If you're looking for less political and more philosophy of superheroes, this book, I used this for a high school project, and did most of my research was based on this book, which has essays from scholars, comic writers, and just any interest you have in what it means for a character to be a superhero. Similarly, this was also I used in that research, and once again, the philosophy of superheroes written by scholars in the context. One of the best books ever written by comics, you ask anyone who's read literature on comics, is this Super Gods by Grant Morrison, who obviously everyone knows who they are. The super god of comics to an extent. If you're interested in like the origins and what that can tell us, this book by Robin S. Rosenberg, who has a PhD in, I think, psychology, but applies that psychological background to the origins of characters and how that informs who they are, why they're superheroes and stuff like that, which is brilliant. Going back to the more political side is, this isn't on comics per se, but this has been really helpful. It's on colonialism and emergent science fiction, including science fiction comics, including that cover there, which is the foundation of modern science fiction, in my opinion. So if you're interested in science fiction or even comics, just science fiction in general, read colonialism and the emergence of science fiction. if you want an outsider look, this was written by someone from, I think, Argentina, who did an analysis of American comics. So if you're looking from an outsider view that isn't Anglo-American on comic book scholarship, I'd highly recommend Of Comics and Men. The last academic one is this by Harriet Earle, who I was lucky enough to go to a talk from.